Hello, class. How are you?
Good.
Can you open the windows? Inside, please.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. Just nervous.
Next week.
No.
Oh, it is.
If I have a 5-second presentation, I'd be nervous.
I mean, it makes sense.
Next
but
week?
also, like,
Probably Monday.
yeah, it's not ideal.
Stay tuned. Okay. Good morning. How are you? Still good?
Yeah.
We know it doesn't really do us much good as long as we follow the guidelines.
What's the lot?
Yeah? So, what did you learn? First of all, did they do a good job?
What's that?
Yeah, be prepared. Trust me. I was in Palm Springs giving instructions. Okay, monitor it remotely. Yeah. But I think everything went safely, right? Everything went smoothly. And so you get a grasp of the overall concept of what we do with some of these technologies in the sensors and actuators domain. Yes.
Do you think you could extend the homework till Wednesday morning this week, so we feel off hour?
Probably not.
Okay.
Okay. I'm gonna talk about all of this.
All right.
The next 2 weeks are gonna be intense. Okay. You're gonna have boom, 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 boom. Okay. And I warn you in advance. How did you do in the labs? The lab sessions in the last 2 sessions? Everything went fine? No glitches? No surprises? Yeah, we will talk about this a little. It's so good to see all of you. How many of you have been to Palm Springs? It was my first time. So in the middle of a desert, they built this town. So I don't know how long it's going to sustain itself with the lack of water in California. Because they get all their waters from Colorado River. And that river is not doing really well.
No.
No?
I don't think Grand Canyon barely exists anymore.
Yeah, and you know what is striking to me is, why do you have all these golf courses? You know, and wasting all this water to keep this grass green for a bunch of rich people, you know, to come and play golf. It just doesn't make sense. Especially in this kind of a climate change era. It is just. Are you coming? Okay, good. Wonderful. Yeah, so it was interesting to me to see this town that is in the danger of, you know, not being able to operate in the near future if you're going to go like this. You know? I think the biggest problem the world will be facing is water. And there are places like this that you're going to get it or feel it first. So on my way to here, Leon and I were talking and we were saying how fast this semester is going. Do you feel it like that too? Or is it going too long for you? I feel like it's like going like this.
It's both at the same time.
What is it?
It's both at the same time.
It's
It's
not-
both too fast and too slow.
Exactly, exactly. Very, very true. Very true. Very true. Yeah. Hello. How are you?
Good.
But you know, fall semester is always like this. To me, at least. Spring, you can feel it maybe because you have this 1 week of spring break. It feels. And then the season really changes. You go from cold to spring. Versus this one is more. Hello. Hi, Jinjin. So we were talking about the lab tour briefly. We'll talk a little bit more once everyone is here. So are you done with your midterms? No. But this one is coming.
Yeah, that's
This one is coming. The most important one.
That's the part.
Yeah, but so in this, the midterms are from what? Early October till mid-October. Most of them are mid-October, right? Some, huh?
I feel like they just scatter.
Yeah, they're scattered. That's right.
They usually happen all at the same time.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I remember once I had 3 finals in 24 hours.
Did they let you
And
leave?
none of them on a budget. I'm like, this is against university's rule. I can't do 3 finals. And I think the professors were less forgiving in the old days. Hello, hello.
Hello.
Yeah, you no longer have to do this scan. Yes, so, but I'm glad you did it anyway.
Hi, Professor.
Hello, hello. So, stick around for a few minutes, patient, don't disappear right away. Oh, I never noticed that this has the split screen. You know, I think for 11 o'clock classes, they should have free coffee. And also for 2 p.m. You see, like this class tomorrow, if they need, you know, like my coffee is now. I don't normally need coffee. As you can tell. But I need to have one, at least. How many of you are coffee drinkers? Good for you. Good for you. Okay.
I tried to undip
So they
myself.
still don't know if this is beneficial or harmful. You know, after all the studies. I cannot leave it out. If coffee runs away, that's it. Yeah. Are you a coffee drinker? Huh?
Anything that
Has caffeine. Don't tell me you drink soda.
I mean,
Yeah, I cannot understand people drinking Mountain Dew in the morning. Please translate this for me.
well, I think that 2 a.m.
At what?
2 a.m.
Oh, so it won't even impact you. It won't even impact you.
No, I mean, it works.
I don't want to be
Wait.
Oh, you wake? Oh, at 2 a.m.?
Monday, like,
At 2 a.m. I drink.
Wow.
it just helps my family so
Pretty good.
much. That's the trade-off. It's just whenever after that 4 hours is over, that
I think.
drink Coke.
How are you?
Good.
Good? I saw your picture. You were paying really good attention at the lab tour. They sent me pictures.
that's good.
Yeah. I was monitoring it before as I called them and said, 10 minutes, everybody's ready. Yeah. See, actually my students feel my presence more when I'm out of town versus when I'm in town. Yeah. because I have more time to check on them. In fact, we catch up more on everything.
How was the thing you guys went to, you and Justin?
I was just telling everyone, I was in Palm Springs, which is like this town in the middle of the desert. Have you been there?
No. What is it, California?
Yes, California is about 2-hour drive from LA, and it needs a lot of water. So
Yes.
I don't know how long they're going to sustain those. So when we have meetings like this, you just trapped, right? Which is both good and bad. It's good because we get to interact a lot, and I really, really miss that. So this was my first conference in 18 months. Yeah, Justin, did you feel? So it's wonderful to see my colleagues, you know.
Was the last one canceled because of COVID?
Yes. And this one was safe because they checked the vaccination before they let us in. All the meals were outdoors, you know. So we had a level of normalcy.
What do you think that?
And we were all wearing masks.
When do you think that the virus would die out there because it's so hot?
What would die out?
The virus?
I don't think it works.
It does get.
Okay, can you just give me a couple of minutes before you start?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we might be.
All right, because I need to go over a few things.
Do you want me to sit down?
Why not? Yeah. And then we get started. Okay, so let's get started. I have a few announcements that I want to go over and make sure that you all are up to date. I talked about briefly about the lab tour last week. I hope you appreciated it. I hope you learned. Something like this, especially with the kind of organization that we conducted, took some effort to make sure that you all be able to benefit from seeing some of the work that we do. What strikes you? What was unusual? What was it that you didn't expect? What excited you? A few comments. I start with you.
I was a little bit shocked that, so it's called microelectromechanical systems, but a lot of it isn't really necessarily electro. I mean, it's very like, it's used in people in different industries coming in and stuff like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, I would, microelectromechanical systems, to me is an old term or terminology. It's mainly miniature devices, but there are sensors and actuators. And most of them use the types of the technologies and processes and fabrication and some advanced technology to create them and design them. I've been attending an online, on and off a summit by Department of Defense, which is actually ending today. And I cannot tell you the excitement behind what is about to happen. Okay? So microelectronics is so coming back. That's not even funny. It's really exciting. And everyone is talking about it. And the moment these bills that I told you at the beginning of the semester, they pass, they're going to pour money into investments, which means more jobs for you guys, which means more opportunities. So this is really an exciting era that is about to take place in this country. And I'm, of course, biased and personally excited about this. This conference that I went to last week is the largest conference in the last 20 years, in particularly focused on microfluidics, flow of liquids in these miniature devices, that they do all sorts of things, including COVID tests that you did the homework on. And this field, of course, is continuing to blossom because there are so much that we do with soft material. There's so much that we now do with hybrid fabrication, which means the soft material combined with CMOS. And it's really exhilarating to see that the new ideas that are emerging. And I think what is significantly important about this field, microfluidics, lab on a chip, that you probably heard during the lab tour and prior to that, is the fact that you could really address a very, very important task in a very clear, smart, creative way that does not require a lot of complexities, right? So I think, I don't know if you agree with me,
Yeah, that's what
and I think that is really the essence of this. Just having a complex device, it doesn't mean that it's really going to change a lot of our lives and having significant impact. In fact, the guy who was presenting yesterday from Sandia National Lab, as I was doing other things and listening to him, oh my God, I mean, you should see some of this new quantum devices that use MEMS technology. They're so complex. And I'm like, wow, this is going to take forever to create this. So you do need that, right? You do need the quantum computing, and we are really leading that right now in Maryland. But at the same time, you could have really clever, simple devices that you could do with soft material and literally with everything you have learned so far. Okay? So my message is that we need both. Okay? Okay. Now that I gave you a little bit of an update on what I did last week and what I learned, the next, particularly next week and the week after, are the defining points, these junctions in this class, that I get to see what you learn. Okay? We're going to have the exam next Thursday. There will be a review session on Monday afternoon.
I don't think it's Monday, because the 25th, we said either the...
We want to
Tuesday
do
or
it
Wednesday.
Monday.
You want to do it Monday?
We want to do it Monday. I was looking at the schedules, and I think Monday makes sense.
Okay.
Because we want to give some room for everyone to absorb what they learn in the review session and still have time to come and talk to you and Jinjin on Tuesday.
Okay.
Okay?
Monday works.
So we're going to do it Monday afternoon. I'm sorry I cannot accommodate everyone's schedule, but it would be at 5 p.m.
Sure.
So at the end of the day, and we will announce the location very soon, like literally this afternoon. Okay? So there would be a review session on Monday. We will also review the guidelines for the lab report 1. I was going to do it today, but I don't think I'm going to have time to do it. I pay, as I told you, and I have been telling you all along, I pay very close attention to what you do on your lab reports. I need to see clear explanation, introduction, explanation of the steps that you did in the lab, cross-section view of each step with different colors. Now you know how to do it, to define the layers and the process steps for each layer. And then I need to see what you learned by explaining what went wrong and why, and analyzing your data. How did you take data? That is important to me. Okay? And then you need to have a discussion paragraph. What did you learn? What are you going to do next? Right? Explore what you learned and try to explain it to me in writing. And then conclusion, the references have to follow strict IEEE reference guideline. And this is going to be done really nicely and professionally. It would be due a week after your exam. So exam would be on 28th on Thursday in class, open book. Only you can bring one sheet front and back with you and your calculator and nothing else. No iPhones, okay, if you want. But so that's what I call open book. Just one sheet, you can write anything you want, and this is the standard size, sheet, not the papers that, you can be attached with the Scotch tape and then you call it one page. Let me finish. And the lab report would be due the Thursday after that on November 4th. Yes, November 4th. Yeah, I reviewed all of this last night. And and it would be due at 5 p.m. We need your electronic copy, PDF. That should be submitted promptly before 5 p.m. the following Thursday. Okay? So, you know, this is a time that we're going to try to see what you learn, and you're going to have to show us, and hopefully that would be a good defining point for you in terms of how you're doing in this class. And as I said, we don't return the exams. We do return the lab reports. The exams, you get to see your grade the following session, and then you can take notes, and we will have extended office hours for you to go and sit down with the two TAs to discuss what you did wrong or what you did right. Okay? Is that clear? Right? Is everything clear? We are finishing the labs, right? The last lab, which was last week, and this week, what did you do? What did we finish? The very last steps. Please, update me.
Well, the last two
Yes.
was, one was etching through the field and gate ox, and then after, so just the etching day. And then after that was doping.
Yes. Okay, and then, and what is left?
We haven't gone to this week's yet.
Excuse me?
We haven't gone to this week's yet.
I cannot hear you.
We haven't gone to this week's lab yet.
You haven't. So this week's lab has not yet started?
No,
Yet.
for Friday.
I think next time we're maybe depositing the metal like the compost.
Okay. When is the last lab?
This week?
No, the last session.
For lab report one?
Huh?
For lab report one?
Yes. When are you done with the fabrication of the devices? This is something I should have had this to updating me instead of me asking you. Yes.
It is next week.
It is next
After
week.
Contacts, it's 8 weeks. After the first 8 weeks, that's all the fabrication.
Okay, so next week is the last lab session, right?
Yes.
So if that's the case, then I will change the deadline for the lab report 1 to the following Monday instead of Thursday, to give you a whole full week to recover from the exam, to learn and absorb what you did in the lab session, and be able to put it together. Okay? Is that fair? Yeah.
There is lab this week, right?
Yes, there is lab this week, and as he said, the last lab session would be next week, right? When we're taking the exam. So I'm giving you an extra few days for the lab report. Instead of having it due on Thursday afternoon, November 4th, we're going to have this due on the Monday following,
So 8, okay.
which would be 8 by 5 p.m. Okay? We will send you the summary of all of this so there won't be any confusion. Okay. And then once we're done with all of this, we're going to continue with the lectures. We're going to go into hopefully thermal oxidation definition, the diffusion and drift, and then we're going to take the diffusion and drift concept and apply it to doping, right? So you understand better the doping mechanism that you saw, or at least have to write about it in the lab, but you're really going to do more homework and understand it better conceptually, okay? And then November 18, we will have our industry day. I promise you we're going to have, you know, a very hopefully fruitful event. I will work out the detail. This will be right before we go to Thanksgiving holiday. Okay? So everything is hopefully working out, and we can continue. I'm sorry, the two of you who are doing the group presentation, for the last, for the short notice. This was partially my fault, but you know, Jijin and Justin should have been on top of it, but that's okay. I hope you had enough time. So please, anything else? And you're going to talk about Liga.
Hi everyone, I'm Dylan.
And I'm Riley, and today we're presenting on the Liga process. So the Liga process is a process that has essentially 3 stages. Has a lithography stage, an electroplating stage, and a molding stage. And it tends to be used to develop microstructures, which can be used for micromechanical devices or MEMS devices. And there are 2 main types of these processes, and they're X-ray Liga and EUV, or extreme ultraviolet Liga. So the first version is X-ray Liga, and the way that X-ray Liga works is you start out with a conductive substrate, or if you don't want to use that, you can deposit a seed layer. And then you're going to spin on a thick layer of photoresist, and this is positive photoresist. And then that's usually something like PMMA.
Isn't that interesting that what you're describing and what you learn about this kind of an advanced topic, they're now kind of like making sense,
Putting themselves together.
right?
Yeah.
Because you've done it, we talk about positive, negative, what do we mean by high energy light and low energy light, right? And what is it used for? So all of this sort of come together with this additive process that is called Liga. And Liga is a German acronym. So I just want to add that to what you say. Yeah.
So once you've spun on the photoresist, you can expose it using X-ray lithography with the mask for the intended microstructure, and then you can develop it, which leaves you with a hole for what you want. And then after that, you are going to electroplate to fill up that hole with the metal that you're going to use for your microstructure. After you've done that, then you're going to use a flood exposure, which means you're just not going to have a mask to set up the rest of the photoresist for development, and develop the rest of that away, which is going to leave you with just this. And once you have just that, you have a microstructure that's stuck to the substrate. Now, in some cases, the adhesion will be low enough that you can use mechanical force to just kind of pop it off of there. In other cases, though, you might have to make sure that the seed layer that you're using is something that can be sacrificial, which means that you can essentially etch it away at the end. And that's in a case where the adhesion is too high, and trying to pry it off with mechanical force would cause defects in the microstructure. And then there's also sort of an alternative to this, which is molding. So in a case where maybe you need to make a bunch of the same microstructure, you would kind of invert the process. So instead of making something like a gear hole, you would leave the gear as the thing that's left over in the photoresist. And then you would electroplate around that photoresist. And then you'd use a sort of precision cutting technique. One of the ones that I read about was wire erosion, which you use to separate the substrate from the actual electroplated material. And then you can use a flood exposure and develop it out that way. And that leaves you with like a metal mold that you can then use over and over again with a bunch of different materials, not just metal, to make the same microstructure over and over again.
And so the other type that we researched was extreme UV lithography. And so this basically has like the same steps as for, the X-ray one, but in this case you use, a UV source in order or instead of the X-ray. So same steps, like you have a seed layer, you spin on the photoresist. In this case, SU8 is most commonly used. You develop it and you electroplate it. In this picture though, what's different is that they inserted an element into there, so that's just kind of like an extra thing that you can do. But all of the steps are the same as for the X-ray, except for, the actual source that you use. So this is just an example of how the lithography kind of works. So you have like a EUV source, and you don't want to use refractive, I guess like, not masks, but refractive optical sources there, because UV light is kind of like in the soft X-ray band, and so refractive opticals can actually absorb some of that light, and that's why you want to use reflective masks. So this EUV source here is just kind of like reflected off of a bunch of mirrors until it gets to the wafer there. So these are just a few pros and cons. For UV Liga, it's a lot less expensive than X-ray, which is why it's commonly used for that. It's also faster and it has smoother sidewalls, but because of that, it also has lower aspect ratios, and the feature sizes can't be as small.
As far as X-ray leak goes, it tends to have fairly high aspect ratios. You can form some pretty complex shapes, like a microgear is a pretty complex shape. Because you're using that thick layer of photoresist, you can get some pretty large heights on your microstructure, so if you need something a little bit taller, you can get that, something of hundreds to thousands of microns, which means you can get things in the millimeters if you need it. It tends to have pretty vertical sidewalls, and most importantly, like I said with the mold, you can have a variation of different structures, of materials for your structure, rather. So you can use something like a polymer or a metal, or I think I even read somewhere that you can even have ceramic. Obviously, high cost is going to be an issue, especially if you're trying to make a bunch of single pieces instead of making a mold. If you're using a mold, it does make it a little bit more inexpensive because you're making the same thing, but you're only making it once with the mold. And you're also, because you're using X-ray lithography, you're going to need access to a synchrotron. So if you don't have access to one of those, you're going to have to go somewhere special for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
This is just our last slide.
Yeah.
So these are just a few applications: precision actuators, optical sensors, microfluidic devices, and I know for the UV type, one of the papers that I read said that it was commonly used in the watch industry, which I thought was really interesting.
Absolutely. I was just going to say that.
Yeah, especially
Good
for
job.
little gears and stuff that go
Yes.
inside of it. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yes.
But yeah, that's it for our
Thank you so
presentation.
much. Can you go to your previous slide? The one that it talks about pros and cons. First of all, thank you. You did a great summary, such a short notice. They learned about this on Monday. You normally have 1 week to put this together. One question, and then I want to just go over this very quickly. One question. Question? No question. Okay. Let me cover some of this very briefly, because I think you guys listed some really important points, and I think you understand much better now that you know all the materials that you learned in the class. So please sit. Thank you. Well done. First of all, this is a technology that allows metal to come into this whole domain of products and research in the form of a miniature device. So I want this to be very clear. This is why this was such a revolution when it took place in Karlsruhe, Germany in mid-80s. Wisconsin was the first state that brought this technology from Germany to US. And the reason for that was that we had the oldest synchrotron radiation center where the actually electron, as I explained very briefly previously, gets accelerated around this very large ring, and as it hits the walls of the ring, it emits X-ray. It's very difficult to maintain a system like this because it's so large, it's so sophisticated, and all these beam lines are coming from this ring for different types of physics, engineering, science, research. Okay? So just want to make that clear. The second thing that is important about this is, see, what they really highlighted here, and I think this is important, that this required X-ray, okay? This requires a UV light. You win in this case because you could get very high definition, very tall structures, because you zap this very thick photoresist in the range of hundreds of microns. But because your X-ray, Hussein, are you taking notes? You taking notes with your laptop?
Yeah,
Okay, because it's if you're doing anything else, because this is important, all right? So you zap this with the X-ray, and then you're able to actually clear it out. Now, what do we mean by high aspect ratio structure? What is high aspect ratio? They mentioned that a couple of times. Yes.
I believe it's the height relative to the width.
It's the height relative to width. Exactly. And why high aspect ratio is high here? Because you could go really deep, you could go very narrow, okay? And that's really, really important, because if you could get these structures to be as tall and narrow, they can be really good capacitors. They can be really good, structures for vibrational sensing, ultimately, and many other applications, okay? This technique still gives you the aspect ratio, but not as good as this one. What else do you lose when you bring the cost down and use the UV light with this reflection techniques that they were talking about? You lose what? Actually, time you could win, okay? It's debatable, but I think what you lose is the narrowness of the structure, is the line width. You can't go as small as you would go with X-ray. Why is that the case? Why is that the case? If the light goes through this thick photoresist, and if it's a very narrow line, if it doesn't have enough energy, it's going to leave behind residues at the bottom. Are you with me? Because it's not really zapping it strong enough, so then the development process will clear it out, right? So you lose in the minimum feature size, okay? But you gain in cost. You don't need synchrotron, right? And you could do this in a clean room. You work with a different type of the photoresist. They mentioned SU8. We use SU8 quite a bit in our lab for different purposes. They call it cheap Liga, okay? So thank you for listening. This is a really great, and I want all of you to pay attention to this. We're going to ask you this in the exam, trust me, and everything else that was presented as a group activity. But Liga, even though it was a revolution in late 80s, this is why I decided to stay at Wisconsin to continue for my graduate work, because we were the only one in the US that was doing it at the time. And the institution was one of the 4 MEMS institutions, and then afterwards, you know, we don't have MEMS activities everywhere. But it was a revolution because you could create these high aspect ratio structures. And then what they mentioned was molding, replication, like what we do with coins, okay? But in this case with miniature devices. And the market for this would have been in billions of dollars. Well, after 30 years, almost, that market was never reached. Why? Why do you think this didn't really become a multi-billion-dollar technology? First of all, it's expensive, right? You need a synchrotron. Second of all, what? You're limited to how narrow you could go, even with X-ray, right? Thirdly, when you do the molding, there's always some stuff gets stuck at the bottom, okay? So you could never create and replicate the master as good as you can, right? So people pour a lot of money into this, and they were disappointed that they lost. But it stayed as a research tool to this day. And there are components like what she said, which is exactly correct. The watch industry uses it, right? So your next slide, which is a great example, this, what do you see immediately that grabs your attention? Huh? Come on, guys, do you also need coffee? Like me? What grabs your attention in a structure like this?
Mechanical advantage?
Huh?
Mechanical
advantage, but even more than that, they're large, right? These are large pieces. You don't need microscope to look at it. You could take it out with a tweezer, right? They're big. They're in the millimeter sizes, right? So with millimeter sizes, watch industry says, yes, we could do the molding, right? And we could make a lot of money because these are not narrow features, right? So do you see where I'm going? So there's always a market for a technology. You have to be clever enough to see how to take advantage of it, right? So this is a very good point. I'm so glad you showed this. Why am I so passionate about this? Because I spent 5 years of my life doing research with LIGO, okay? So you can tell where my excitement is coming from. Okay, can we go to the, Justin? Jinjin, you can go. Now this is going to be a marathon of finishing the wet etching and dry etching today. So please take notes because we're going to go fast, okay?
And then your last talk was etching.
Yes. So we talked about subtractive technology last time, right? What are some of the things that we talked about subtractive technology? Who can start the discussion? What did we talk about subtractive technology? We talked about isotropic versus anisotropic. Isotropic means in all directions. Anisotropic means direction, right? Now, when we have these two mechanisms, we also talk about undercut, right? That if it's isotropic, it's going to go in all directions. So you're going to have undercut. You're going to have lateral etching, okay? And we use the oxide as an example at the end of the last lecture. We talk about selectivity. What is selectivity? We talk about selectivity. What is selectivity? So if you wanted to etch silicon using oxide as a masking layer, we talk about how much of the masking layer will get consumed during the etch process for silicon, right? And that gives you a ratio. So if you have a very selective mask, you don't etch any of your masking layer, right? We use the hydrofluoric acid, as you recall, as one of the examples for the wet etching. And I say HF, hydrofluoric, etches oxide. It does not etch silicon. It does not etch silicon nitride, right? So the selectivity of the silicon nitride for etching silicon using HF is really good, but HF is not going to etch any of them, okay? But if you want to etch oxide, then nitride is a very good selective mask. Does that make sense? Yeah? You seem confused.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just stating it back.
Okay. Yes, Hossein.
For the isotropic property, is it, like, it's not all types of chemicals, is it? Or is it only?
It's not all what?
Like certain, like BOE, right? That's H5 101, it's isotropic, but like, there's other chemicals that aren't isotropic, right?
Of course.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it depends. It depends on what your material is and what your etchant is.
Okay, so the
Okay.
isotropic property depends on.
Isotropic what?
That property of isotropic depends on what you're.
Yeah, right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, of course.
I thought you were saying.
No, it's not. It depends. Normally, I mean, you're going to see an example of the wet etchant that is anisotropic, and that's for etching silicon. And that's based on your crystal orientation. It's based on Miller indices. Okay, we're going to get to that in a second. So we also talk about how important it is to have what? A lifetime, to take into consideration the lifetime of your etchant. Because when you mix chemical, they react. They react and they generate heat, right? And that mix of chemicals or just one chemical alone, when you start using it as an etchant, it has a lifetime. So you want to make sure that you do the etch process and measuring your etch rate during that window that your chemical is actually functioning almost 100%. Are you with me? Because after a while, it does what? It decays, right? So that's one of the difficulties with the etch process. And of course, we talk about cool process control. We talk about also contamination. Why is contamination is an issue? Why is contamination is an issue with the wet process? Why do we have to concern about contamination with wet process? We're talking about wet etching. Why do you think the contamination is problem? Yes.
I'm not sure, but if it's in a bath, that means that it's probably easier for contamination because if it's anywhere in the
Absolutely. When you're in a beaker, when you're in a solution, right? You have to be very, very careful not to introduce other components, right? And then also residues, byproducts will come out of this wet process, right? And you generate what as a result of that? What is it that we've been talking about all along with the chemical? When we use them, we generate waste. Okay, class, please wake up. Your exam is coming next week. Okay? It's a waste process. Okay. So normally we place them in a beaker. And we use heat and agitation. Why heat and agitation speed up the process? Why do you think that's the case? In a wet process, yeah.
It's just adding more kinetic energy.
You forgot to bring my cheat list. Cheat sheet.
I did. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that.
It just adds more kinetic energy to the system.
It adds more what?
Kinetic energy.
It adds more kinetic energy, right? It does what?
Speeds up reaction.
It accelerates the reaction, right, of the chemical with the compound that you're trying to etch. It makes sense, right? If you heat it up, you will have more reactions. If you agitate it, you will have more reaction. How do you think we do the agitation? How do we do it? What is the mechanism? What do you think the mechanism is in the lab? Is in our lab? Yes.
A propeller at the bottom?
Is what?
Is a propeller at the bottom that sort of just spins the water around?
Is what?
A propeller at the
A
bottom?
propeller. What is that propeller? How does it spin?
A magnet underneath?
Magnet. You use a magnet, right? So the heater that this beaker sits on it is also provide magnetic field. So you go reverse, and then this magnetic bar starts agitating. So here's a question for you. Where do you lose with agitation? Where do you lose with... Agitation is good, right? So it accelerates. Heat is good. It accelerates the etch process. But what do you think you lose in return? I know I'm putting him on the spot, because then he will remember it, for example. What do you think you will lose in return? That's okay, no problem. What do you think you lose?
control of the reaction.
Control of the reaction, but then also your final product. Your final product. It would be less uniform, or I call it rough, right? Why do you think it's rough? So here's what I think is rough. As you agitate it, as you introduce heat, you accelerate this etch process, more of these chemicals heating the compounds, okay? So because this timing is so fast, you end up getting more bubbles, right? The bubbles is your byproducts. The bubble on your surface causes roughness. So the more bubble you have, the rougher your surface is. Now, in some cases, you care, right? Because you want the surfaces to be as smooth as possible. In some other cases, you just want to etch the crap out of it and finish it, right? And get to the final product. So you don't really care how rough the surface is. All you need is to get rid of the film, right? Does that make sense? So this is really important. So please make note of this, right? And I think this is important also because, as you see, I keep repeating this with regard to every single process that we talk about. You gain in one, you lose in another, right? So there is always a trade-off. In fact, I can never think of a technology that is a win-win situation. You always have to think about it as a designer. How fast do I want to do this? How smoothly I want to do this? What is my final definition needs to look like? What do I need to do next? How this etch process is going to damage my underlying layer? Do I care or don't I care? Right? Yes?
What does TC stand for?
Thermocouple. Okay. Yeah?
Yeah, measure the.
Right. Measuring the, yeah, sorry about that. Good question. Okay, move on. And so this is an example that you want to do your etching, and that's your products that's coming out, and that's the reactants. But look at what? What is this? Huh? This is an isotropic etch, yes. But what's happening here? Undercutting, right? Undercutting. So undercutting, when we have undercutting, this is important because, as you recall a couple of lectures ago, I said you need to characterize this to see what your undercutting is, so then you can design this opening accordingly. So as this undercuts, you still end up with the line width that you need. Are you with me? This is called biasing. Okay? This is called biasing, which means you measure the bias, you understand what level of undercut you have using this etchant, using this process, using this time, using this etch rate, and then once you have control over that, once you're confident enough, then you design your optical mask for that given lateral edge that you get, and that's called biasing. Yes?
How do you know what the thickness of your mask should be so that you don't get undercut?
It depends on your, good question. It depends on your selectivity, right? So you need to know how much of your mask gets consumed during the etch process, right? And are you going to have enough to be able to get the final product?
So when we are doing wet etching, do we keep the mask on it while we?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, that's the whole idea.
Okay.
Yeah, your masking layer stays for you to have that kind of alignment. In some cases, you let the masking layer stays, right? Because that's part of your device process. But in most cases, you have to worry about removing it after your etch process is done. Does it make sense? Okay. I'm sorry, I'm going to go a little bit faster than usual because I want to get to both wet and dry etching today. So for the oxide etching, we talk about HF, right? And hydrofluoric acid, and we say that it does not etch silicon, and photoresist is also resistant, although I argue that it does etch the photoresist as well. It's very interesting. Often people use photoresist as a masking layer, and they let this stay long enough so they can remove the entire oxide thickness. What may happen, and it goes back to what Yekta was asking, if you don't have enough photoresist as a masking layer thickness-wise, all of a sudden the whole film starts doing what? Peel off. Because it's not strong enough.
So you etched everything under and then
Not etch everything under, but it does not, the adhesion will not stay all the way to the end. The adhesion between the photoresist and the oxide that you're etching, right? So this is why I say it does also etch photoresist, because it diffuses through and it makes the film less solid. Yeah.
So, it needs to get through the silicon faster than the photoresist. That's good, right?
What is that?
It just needs to get through the silicon faster than the photoresist. That's good.
Yes. Well, if you, not silicon, but silicon oxide in
Yeah,
this case, because HF does not etch silicon,
Right.
okay, as it says up there too. But my point here is that it's really important the choice of the masking layer that you're using. Now, you guys use buffered oxide etch to etch oxide in the lab, BOE. What is BOE? BOE is, of course, a diluted HF with the DI water, but it also has some ammonium to make it more what? More, I would call it delicate, less harsh, right? So that's the buffer, that's the job of the buffer. This is why it's called buffered oxide etch, right? It really just keeps the etching in a sort of a more maintained, balanced way instead of just having the hydrofluoric and the DI water. The normal etch rate for using BOE is roughly about 100 nanometers a minute. But in reality, this is what you need to characterize before making any subsequent decisions and the steps forward. So you always, so this is an important point. I want you guys to grasp this, particularly those who I hope will continue in this area, that you get this data from the literature, okay? We often do this in this class. In fact, my graduate level course, we teach this in the first homework. You start with the literature information, right? The information that is published by others. You narrow it down to what you need, okay? So you say, I use the HF, they use the HF. I want to etch this much, they etch that much, right? They're telling me the etch rate is this, okay? That would be my starting point, right? But what do you need to do in practice to reproduce it, right? To measure it. Because if you always go with what is reported in the literature, you end up having a lot of difficulties because you don't know what they used and how reproducible their information is. Does that make sense? You see why I'm emphasizing this? So rely on literature, but always reproduce. I mean, Justin does that all the time, right, Justin?
So, Professor, for
Yes.
you said BOE, the buffer oxide etch, is the best, is the primer wet etching that we use for silicon oxide.
It's just one method. I didn't say it's the best. It's just one method. It's basically keeps it more balanced. We don't use it for all etching purposes.
And it depends what kind of wet etching you're using to see if it's going to be dissolved in it or not.
I don't understand your question.
I'm going to ask after class.
You ask after the class, yes. Okay. The good thing about etching, wet etching processes, that depending, let's just take the oxide. Depending on what thicknesses you etch, you could get a rainbow of light, right? Or reflection of light. And because ellipsometer, which is the tool that measures the thickness by giving it the refractive index for the oxide, you have a reading of what literally your thickness is, right? Based on that information. So for those who do the work, they can just tell from the kind of a color that you're using what kind of, for instance, the final thickness is. Are you with me? Now, here's a question for you. How do I know I etched all the way to the end of the oxide without even using any profilometer to measure it? So you do the etching, you're done, you rinse it, you dry it. You don't have this, okay? Because all you needed to do was what is without using a microscope, without using a profilometer, which is a contact profilometer. Yes, you did it in the lab. Huh? Yes.
Does the water just heat up?
Absolutely. So you drop a water, and if the water does what? Stay, it means what?
You still have some.
You still have oxide. Because oxide is hydrophilic. It locks water. But if it's etched all the way and it reached the silicon, then water does what? It repels, right? After a second or two. And that's because it's silicon, and silicon is what? Hydrophobic. It has a phobia. It hates water. Okay? As much as it reacts with oxygen, it doesn't hold on to water. You with me? So we call that water test. Okay? And it's beautiful. The first time I saw it, I was an undergraduate like you. I'm like, wow. It went from here to there, right? Wow. And that's the property of the silicon. Okay. Going through this fast. Now, this is an example that you don't necessarily do in this class, but you're learning the concept because it's part of the wet etching. For etching silicon, you could have a case that is isotropic, okay? Etching silicon in all directions. What does that? A type of mixture of acids that doesn't necessarily follow the crystal orientation of that opening of silicon. Because the moment it sees it, it starts etching it all the way. That's the property of that mixture. But in another case, it etches it based on crystal orientation of the silicon, of that opening that you have. So in a case like this, which is a V groove, right, I use a different etchant, which is called potassium hydroxide. I'm going to talk about this in a second. But what is happening here? If this is the opening, which planes etches faster than the other? Who did the Miller indices?
The isotropic?
Huh?
The isotropic?
That's the anisotropic, right? So this is an example of isotropic. This is an example of an anisotropic, right? Who did the? You guys did the Miller indices?
No, I wasn't answering your question.
111.
Huh?
111.
1-1. So 1-1-1.
And one. Wait, don't say it. 110.
1-0-0. Okay.
100, okay.
So this is 1-0-0. You guys did the homework on this. Okay? And this is 1-1-1. Okay? 1-0-0 is what you see under microscope. It's the opening based on the crystal orientation of your wafer. Okay? This is 1-1-1. Now, which one etches faster than the other?
100.
Come on, 100, right? So it etches the 100 much faster than 1-1-1. Why do you think that's the case? What needs to get etched away? More.
SiO2?
No, I'm talking about 1-0-0, 1-1-1. Let's say,
think in the 111, it is more exposed silicon atoms, so like.
Very good. 111 has more dense atoms on that plane. 100 has less. So it takes longer to etch this because you have more atoms to take away. Are you with me? 100 has less number of atoms. So therefore it etches faster. And you end up with a V groove. Right? The premier technology based on developing pressure transducers, pressure sensor. Okay, and we're going to talk about this case study more so you understand how we utilize this wet process. I'm sorry, I'm covering a lot of the materials. Hey guys. So I need to, we'll talk about this more in the review session on Monday. That's why I have my expert sitting over there so he knows what to emphasize on Monday. Okay? This is the case that we have dry etching, right? In case of the dry etching, my God, can I finish this? I talk so much at the beginning. It's another form of anisotropic etching. But look at this case with the dry etching. It's so uniform. The definition is so pronounced. You have less, almost zero, in some cases, lateral etching, right? This is why dry etching is so preferred, because you end up returned by what? Cost, right? Maintenance, equipment, calibration, yes?
Like you said that, or you might have said that there's lots of like contamination with wet.
Yes.
Wouldn't with dry, whatever you get rid of stay where it is?
Very good question. I know where you're going. So with dry, you also have contamination. But what you need to do, which the fab lab technicians are always afraid of me, because I tell them, did you do this? Is to make sure that every user cleans the system with alcohol after they're done. And then there should be a calibration done every week for this very sensitive equipment to make sure that the etch rate is maintained. Because if you have contamination, your etch rate changes and you end up with the crappy devices, right? So in a very serious lab, research, particularly industry, forget it about research. In industry, they maintain this daily, right? Because they cannot tolerate any contamination. But you hit it in a very, very good subject. Absolutely. Yes?
It's the dry etching, it's in the plasma system, right? So
Yeah.
if you say usually in plasma systems they're like contaminated?
I just answered.
Oh, you did?
You were not listening. Yeah. Okay, so okay. So you could have a case in the silicon that depending on your opening, okay, you could have in isotropic case a spherical shape of very narrow features versus one that is quite wide. Okay? And that really depends on what your design is. Okay? Now the question is what you see you are capable of in learning quickly is the fact what you see is different.
It's deeper.
It's deeper, right? So which one is deeper?
The one that is wider.
The wider one, right? The smaller one is less deep, right? So you have consumed less of that. This could be problematic for device making. Because in a real life scenario, you want these two to be what? Exactly the same height. And that's when the process design comes into play, right? You design a process at volume, right? The same height, yes.
So is that why when we're making the like aluminum like contact holes, they're all like little dots that are the same? Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there are tricks to do this by how you actually introduce these holes, and you maintain the etch rate for different line widths that you have, right? Now you have to get into the terminologies. I'm not going to explain because you guys have done homework. We're talking about line widths, so you need to maintain this based on a line width that you have, depending on the product that you're trying to develop, right? It's not a subject of this course, but is this material that you need to learn in parallel based on what you're learning to develop transistors. Okay. Justin, can you and also include this table for everyone to have? We're not going to go so much. Right? And you're going to be responsible to do the problems in the exam, right? So that you, because I'm not going to also talk about pressure sensor. You could go over that, right? So let's go to the dry etching. So as you saw, I eliminated the slides. I passed them for the wet etching. Justin will elaborate more on this on Monday, but just keep in mind that the discussions on dry etching is what you use more for your homework and for the exam. We talk about dry etching in the context of what? Plasma, right? We touched upon this previously in the form of a sputtering, right? What is plasma? What is a plasma? Can you speak louder? When you heat it what? Well, it has a high temperature when the particles collide. But what is the concept of the plasma? We talked about this when we were covering the sputter. What is plasma system?
High energy.
High energy,
Yeah.
ionized molecules, and the high energy comes from where? The high energy comes from applying the field between these two parallel plates. We talk about anode and cathode. In the case of the sputtering, the ionized gases, the molecules will hit the target, which is metal, and then the particles will drop on your substrate or opening, right, in your silicon wafer. What happens in the case of the etching? In the case of, more specifically, reactive ion etching, RIE? Yes?
You're knocking silicon atoms out.
You're knocking the silicon, so you reverse it, right? In this case, your gas hits the silicon, so then you have a combination of what? Chemical reaction as well as physical reaction, right? You need to know that by now. Chemical and physical, right? So if this is chemical and physical, it's not really the concept for all types of dry etching, but in general, that's the governing case, right? In some cases like ion milling, we have no chemical reaction. It's just a bombardment of the very high energy molecules, and there is no chemical reaction takes place. And in the case of ion milling, we normally use that for etching metal. So there is no chemical reaction takes place. But if I'm etching oxide, if I'm etching nitride, if I'm etching silicon, right, using reactive ion etching, using a plasma system like that, we have a form of chemical reactions as well as physical. Okay? So remember that. Sputtering, The ionized species interact with the surface, as I said. They create power that controls this process. You have a high vacuum systems. The ionic species are accelerated towards cathode, which in this case could be silicon or oxide or nitride. And we could have both. So here's one thing that you need to remember. In the form of, in a dry etching process, we could also have isotropic etching as well as anisotropic, right? Isotropic and anisotropic. What makes it isotropic? What differentiates it? So I have a silicon to etch. I want to make it an isotropic etch.
But it goes in different
I know, but what makes that happen? What allows that to happen? So I have the same plasma system, I have the same power system, but in one case I etch the silicon isotropically, in another case I etch it anisotropically.
reflections.
Hossein was first.
Direction of electric field?
Direction, no, they both have the same direction. The direction changes based on the power that you use, but that's not the governing point that I'm asking for. It was a good guess, but it was not the,
I was gonna say anode, or like it's dependent on the anode.
you were saying the same thing as you're
Yes.
saying, yeah. Okay.
I'm just guessing it's the gas. like
Yes! Sorry, I'm not excited. Yes, it's a gas, right? So in one case we have a gas that when it reacts with silicon, it does what? Isotropic etching. In another case, we have a gas that when it reacts with silicon, it's more anisotropic, and what governs it is the power. But it's really a combination of the type of the gas and the type of the power that you use. Okay? Very good. As I said, in case of the ion milling, which is a form of the dry etching, actually, this is very similar to sputtering. You literally just change the polarity in a sputtering system. You have purely physical etching in this case. Okay? No chemical reactions. It's normally used for etching metal. It's highly anisotropic. It has poor selectivity because why? Why do you think in an ion milling that there is no chemical reaction, you have poor selectivity? What does poor selectivity means? It means that the masking layer also gets etched away significantly as your
because you're using noble gas ions, I'm assuming they react with everything.
It reacts with, it hits everything. It's a physical reaction. It knocks off the surface, right? So it doesn't differentiate as much, right? Between a gold layer or nitride layer or oxide layer because it just blasts it, right? Because it has such high energy and you constantly carving it out. Are you with me? But if that's the case, and I'm concerned about smoothness, I come to you and say, if I'm concerned about smoothness, is that a problem? What do I mean by smoothness? The smoothness of the surface, the smoothness of the sidewalls, right? Are you with me? Would ion milling work?
No.
No. Please pull up your mask. Thank you. It won't work. Why?
Because it's so aggressive and it hits everything.
It's so aggressive that it hits everything, right? So you really end up with surfaces, right? As well as poor selectivity. So if you have a system like this, you end up with definitions that are really rough, right? But then it really depends on the application, right? But reactive ion etching, on the other hand, which is the general dry etching technique that you have already used in the lab or used with the help of the technician, is a system that uses both physical and chemical reactions in a plasma system. It has a controllable rate of etching that is precisely controlled for a variety of materials, dielectric as well as metal. You can go depth as deep as 10 microns, but that's about the limit. Because anything deeper than that, your mask will not hold, because the power system that runs this machine is not strong enough to give you the selectivity that you need between your masking layer and your desired material. Are you with me? So normally, this is a tool that you only etch angstroms or nanometer or 1 micron, right? So if I want to etch 1 micron of oxide, most definitely I'm going to use this, right? If I want to use 1 micron of silicon nitride, I will use this. I also have to pay attention to my selectivity. You know, what masking layer do I need to use in order to get exactly the depth that I need in the layer that I'm etching? Did I ever answer your question? Or
Yeah.
I skipped you?
You skipped me, but I saw the answer on the last slide.
Okay, I apologize.
No problem.
I'm trying to cover too many things. I don't want to ignore you. So, and of course, you know, I'm not going to go over these bullets because we covered them in conceptually, but I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that there is a limit by which you can actually etch the material of choice. And you're limited because of the type of the power and gas that this system provides. Now, this was the revolution, yes.
You don't have to answer this, but
Yeah.
I noticed it's 13.56 megahertz. Is there something like, I saw that earlier, is there something special about that?
Very good point. Empirically, yes. Because that results in the best optimum. You know, this is 30. There's be more reason behind that. That is more on the plasma physics side, right? But in terms of the process and technology, I would argue that that's often defined empirically by trial and error. Yeah. You have a question?
Oh, no.
Okay. So let me finish the lecture by going over this, and Justin will touch upon this more on Monday. So what was unique about LIGA? We covered a lot of materials today, guys. Okay? I mean, you really need to go and review this. What was discussed about LIGA?
Very tall.
Very tall components in what? I know, but in what material? What material did I say that it was the backbone of the LIGA? Metal. Okay? It was mainly used for metal because you electroplate into those molds, right? You electroplate. And so you do the lithography, you clean it up, you have a seed layer at the bottom. We talked about electroplating before. And that seed layer of metal allows you to electroplate into it. Okay? And then you come up all the way till you end the cavity, and then you remove the resist, and you end up with these tall structures. Are you with me?
So what's electroplating?
We didn't talk about electroplating. Okay, don't worry about it. We'll come back to
We
it.
did talk about it.
I think we talked about it.
We presented.
Yeah, you presented. That's what I'm saying. Yes. What am I talking about? Yes, you presented it. Yes. Okay, let me continue. This was an alternative to LIGA that came out 5 years, 6 years after LIGA was introduced to the world. And the reason that this was such a revolutionary process is because you could do what? You could etch in the silicon very, very deep. And the reason you could do this is because you could use a masking layer which is photoresist, and you could have up to maybe 10 micron of photoresist as a masking layer that you could put on using your spinning process. But what is really unique about this process is that you use a gas which is called SF6, and it etches the silicon isotropically. So the first cycle, it goes through and start etching the silicon really fast isotropically, without attacking the photoresist as much. Are you with me? And then immediately, it changes to what I call C4F8 or fluorine, which is a carbon, a ceramic, I'm sorry, of a very thin layer of polymer. Very thin layer of polymer in the range of monolayer or nanometer, right? And then the next cycle starts etching it again. So when this happens, this is isotropic, right? So this SF6 is going to start etching the side walls. But before it etches this polymer and get to the silicon, the next layer of passivation of this polymer kicks in. So it's etching, passivation, etching, passivation, etching, passivation, etching, passivation. And this way, you don't attack your masking layer, which is photoresist, but you could etch all the way through the silicon. Are you with me? This is very clever. It brings billions of dollars to Bosch. And my friends, who actually is an author of my handbook, one of the chapters on deep RA, he basically saved Bosch in Germany by creating this and the patent that he got out of this. This revolutionized the field because all of a sudden we could have what? Not only metal, but very tall structures in silicon. Most of what we use in this, most of it, from your gyroscope to accelerometers, they use deep reactive energy. Okay, question?
Is the reason why we go straight down the similar reason that we talked about earlier with the 100 and 111?
Yeah, it has nothing to do with the 100-111. This is a dry etch.
It has nothing to do.
Has nothing to do. When we talk about that, that was a wet etch process. Okay? This is purely dry etch. And the reason it's anisotropic is because it's not just only etch, it's also passivation. So it goes from one cycle of etch to the next cycle of passivation, and it keeps going until you reach your desired. Passivation means you cover it with a thin layer of polymer to protect the side walls and the top layer. So when the ions, these high energy ions, these molecules hit it, they first etch the bottom because it's in front of them, right? But it also etches the side walls, but it's going to be a much slower etch in the side walls. So before it's going to attack the side wall, the next cycle starts.
It goes down.
It keeps going, it keeps going, it keeps going, it keeps going. So you could etch 300, 400, 500 microns in silicon with only thin layer of photoresist. Yes?
Yeah, I'm a bit confused. So is the Norris layer manually put on, or?
No, it's all with gases, right? So it's etching and deposition. Etching and deposition, but its deposition is all over.
That's part of the process.
Yes, good question. Yes, and that's the clever part, because you're depositing this thin layer of polymer, this ceramic. Yeah.
Kind of like with the ion milling and like reverse circle area, so it's kind of opposite of buttering. How fast the ions need to move to actually hit
In a system like this?
like in the, yeah, I know. Like, how fast, like, this is smooth, like, you have to actually not.
That you're using, but it's pretty fast, right? In the ion milling case.
Right.
This is different. These are very high energy molecules, very high energy, right? Other questions? Yeah.
So when you,
by the time you put the polymer down, the next etching cycle comes in. So it etches the polymer at the top. It also etches a little bit of photoresist. The photoresist is going to etch the wave ultimately. Okay? So 10 micron is enough for etching 400 microns of the. By the time it etches it, the next cycle of passivation comes in. So it protects the sidewalls all the time. Right? Otherwise, it's going to just go isotropic. Right? And it will have no direction. Yes, last question.
I couldn't hear this question, but I got it.
No problem.
How do you remove the positive polymer at the end?
Stay tuned.
Okay.
Stay tuned. What I'm going to do after the exam, I will allocate the whole session. I need to make sure that, okay, because it was the first institution that it really brought this technology here. So I moved from Wisconsin to MIT to work on this. And the device that I is a battery, was a shirt button. A jet engine. Okay? Multiple devices compact, integrated in a size like this. And the technology that allowed it to do it was this. Okay? So stay tuned. I'll show you some pictures, cool pictures, so you see. And I will tell you how I did it. Okay? Okay, guys. You have a lot on your plate. Okay? Please keep up. Your homework are all graded. Homework number 5
I'm still grading.
is still grading it, but you're going to finish homework number 6. Well, homework number 6 is due Monday. We're not going to be able to grade it right away. We will provide the solutions. Okay? We'll provide the solutions for the homework you're working on right now. So you will have this for your exam. Monday afternoon, it would be a review session, okay, at least 1 hour. Exam will be in this room next Thursday. Please be on time. Open book, one and cover, and then we give you an additional whole week to finish the lab report 1, and it will be due the Monday after. Okay?
There's a lot of people, I can't do it probably on Zoom. The Zoom will be, I'll try to.
A lot of material.
I'll try to do it in person. I was gonna try to do it in person, but I could try to do it.
How are you doing?
Whether he wants it in person or on Zoom.
You're
I'll let you
okay?
know, like, probably right after class.
I prefer Zoom because they got a more live. It'll be nice.
Okay.
That's
Just like.
Professor, so I just
I'll ask what he wants. I can try to do a little bit of both.
measure how thick. So the only thing
You have a question for me?
I had a much smaller, and then like we wanted to make sure that the sizes that it was.
So,
How?
I can post the like sizing, I can post all the slides.
There was mismeasurement in
Yeah,
there.
These again, like, I'm gonna post some of
So
the
you do
table
this
or
by your
rows of common slides. But yeah, if there's anything specific you want to see again, I can do that.
So you slow down the
The
other.
problem with it is when we do
Other wider.
stuff,
You, so
when you take the class again, you gotta change everything.
it's the same
I don't know why
system,
that just
guys,
way was.
going inside the.
But
The new,
you can
the
introduce
new,
some holes
because
in your
of,
mask.
I guess the,
So
everyone
after
going
the
online and coming
process,
back, I think the new thing is to kind
work with the ratio
everyone
of
expects
your
lecture
classes
materials just to
that
be
you work with.
of
Okay?
available.
So that also slows it down. You can
Thank
never
you.
get it the same. You never get it the same. But you could reduce the one that is white.
How do we make sure that?
This object says he wants you to build a furnace.
We are waiting.
And pay attention instead of like just looking at this.
We
That's-
are.
I mean, that's just logic.